A DNA test just broke apart a story that the Blackfoot Nation believed about themselves for hundreds of years. And what scientists found in the blood was something nobody expected. Before you keep watching, do one thing for me. If you have any native ancestry, or if you've ever wondered where your own family really came from, stay to the end. This story might change how you think about your own roots too. For centuries, the Blackfoot people have been known as one of the toughest, proudest nations of the North American plains. Their name comes from an old story. Some say their moccasins turned black from walking through fire, ash, or burnt prairie grass. Others say it came from dark soil on their feet after long hunts. Either way, the name stuck, and it fit them, because the Blackfoot were warriors, hunters, survivors of brutal winters, an endless open land. For a long time, historians told a simple story about them. They said the Blackfoot came from the north, that they slowly moved down from Canada to what is now Montana, that they were one single people, one bloodline, one migration path, moving together across the land like a single wave. That was the story in textbooks. That was the story passed down in documentaries. Clean, simple, easy to explain in one paragraph. But real history is almost never that clean. And when scientists finally got permission to study Blackfoot DNA carefully, comparing it to ancient bones, old burial sites, and other native nations across the continent, something strange started showing up. The results didn't match the simple story, not even close. Some of what they found lined up. But other parts pointed somewhere completely different. Different migration paths, different ancestral mixing, signs of connection to groups that were never supposed to be part of the Blackfoot story at all. And that's when researchers realized something big. The story everyone believed about the Blackfoot Nation was only part of the truth, maybe even the smaller part. To understand why this discovery matters so much, you have to understand how old this land really is. Long before Canada had that name, long before Montana had that name, long before any mapmaker ever drew a border on this continent, people were already living here, walking here, raising children here, burying their loved ones in the same soil. Some researchers believe the first humans crossed into North America over 10,000 years ago, maybe longer. They came through frozen land bridges or along ancient coastlines, moving slowly, generation after generation, following animals, rivers, and seasons. Over thousands of years, those first groups spread out. They became many different nations, different languages, different traditions, different ways of surviving the land. The Blackfoot Confederacy became one of those nations. It wasn't just one tribe. It was actually made up of several groups joined together. The Siksika, the Kainai, also called the Blood, and the Piikani, sometimes split into north and south. Together they controlled a massive stretch of land. Grass that seemed to touch the sky. Rivers that never seemed to end. And endless herds of buffalo that gave them food, clothing, shelter, and tools. For generations, life on the plains revolved around the buffalo. The Blackfoot didn't just hunt them, they respected them. Entire ceremonies were built around the buffalo hunt. Songs were sung before the hunt began. Prayers were whispered as thanks after an animal gave its life. This wasn't just survival. It was a relationship with the land that ran deeper than most people today can imagine. And through all of that, the Blackfoot built a reputation. Other nations respected them, some feared them. Their warriors were known for incredible horsemanship once horses arrived on the plains, changing everything about how they lived, hunted, and fought. This is the version most people learned. Strong, proud, united, one bloodline moving as one people across the northern plains. But DNA doesn't care about the story we like. DNA only tells you what actually happened in the blood, passed down quietly through thousands of years, hidden in every human cell. And when scientists began comparing Blackfoot genetic markers to other native populations, patterns started appearing that nobody expected. Some of the DNA lined up perfectly with what historians predicted. Deep, ancient roots connected to early plains populations. That part made sense, but other markers pointed somewhere else entirely. Traces linked to populations far to the west. Some genetic signals connected to groups near coastal regions, hundreds of miles from where the Blackfoot were believed to have always lived. At first, some researchers thought it might be a mistake, contaminated samples, bad data. That happens sometimes in genetic research, especially with older techniques. So they tested again, different samples, different labs, different comparison groups. The pattern held. Something in the ancestry of the Blackfoot people didn't match the simple, single migration story that had been repeated for generations. If you're starting to feel that itch, the questions building up in your mind, hold on to that feeling. Because we're only getting started, and the next part of this story goes even deeper into what that DNA was really hiding. To understand what this means, we need to talk about how human migration across North America actually worked. Not the simple version, the real version. For a long time, many scientists believed in one clean idea. One group of goes, this means we need to talk about how human migration across North America actually worked. Not the simple version, the real version. For a long time, many scientists believed in one clean idea. One group of people crossed into North America. They spread out slowly. They split into different tribes over thousands of years, like branches growing from a single tree trunk. But newer research, using more advanced DNA tools, is telling a messier, more human story. Instead of one wave of migration, there were likely multiple waves, spread across thousands of years. Different groups arriving at different times, sometimes mixing with people who were already here, sometimes staying separate, sometimes moving again generations later. This means native nations across North America are not simple branches of one tree. They are more like a woven pattern, different threads crossing, mixing, separating, and crossing again over thousands of years. When you understand that, the Blackfoot DNA results start to make a lot more sense, and they become even more fascinating. Because what researchers believe they may be looking at is not one simple ancestry line, but evidence of ancient contact, mixing, and shared movement between groups that were once thought to be completely separate. Some evidence suggests that ancestors connected to the Blackfoot may have interacted with, or descended in part from, populations that also contributed to nations living far from the northern plains. Groups whose old trails may have crossed mountains, rivers, and coastlines long before anyone was writing anything down. Historians still debate exactly how and when this mixing happened. Some believe it happened very early, thousands of years ago, during the earliest waves of migration into this land. Others believe smaller waves of contact continued for centuries afterward, through trade, marriage, and shared survival during hard winters. But almost everyone studying this data agrees on one important thing. The old idea of the Blackfoot as one closed, isolated bloodline moving alone across the plains does not match what the DNA is showing. Their story is bigger than that, older than that, and far more connected to other native nations than most textbooks ever suggested. Think about what that actually means for a second. For hundreds of years, outsiders tried to draw simple lines around native nations. One tribe, one territory, one bloodline. It made things easier to write down, easier to put on a map, easier to control, honestly, once colonization began. But real human history rarely fits into simple lines. People move. People fall in love across different groups. People adapt, mix, and try to draw simple lines around native nations. One tribe, one territory, one bloodline. It made things easier to write down, easier to put on a map, easier to control, honestly, once colonization began. But real human history rarely fits into simple lines. People move. People fall in love across different groups. People adapt, mix, and carry pieces of many ancestors inside them, even when their identity, their culture, and their community stay strong and clear. The Blackfoot Nation's identity was never just about a single bloodline. It was about shared language, shared land, shared ceremony, shared survival through some of the harshest winters on the entire continent. DNA is only one small piece of a much bigger human story. But it's a piece that forces us to ask deeper questions. If you're starting to wonder how much of your own family story might be more complicated than you were told, you're not alone. Take a second and imagine explaining this discovery to someone who has never heard it before. Would it surprise them as much as it's surprising you right now? Let's go even deeper, because there's another layer to this story that most people never hear about at all. For a long time, outside researchers controlled almost everything written about Native American history and DNA. Early scientists, often with little respect for Native communities, took hair samples, blood samples, and bones without proper consent. They wrote papers. They made conclusions. And Native nations were rarely asked what they thought about any of it. This left a deep wound of distrust between many Native communities and the scientific world, and it's a completely understandable wound. So when new DNA research started challenging old stories about tribes like the Blackfoot, some communities were cautious, not because they were afraid of truth, but because history had already taught them that outside researchers often twisted truth into whatever fit their own agenda. This is a really important part of the story because it shows this isn't just about ancient migration patterns. It's about respect. It's about power. It's about who gets to tell a nation's story. In recent years, something has been slowly changing. More Native-led research groups have been formed. More studies now involve tribal elders, tribal historians, and tribal permission from the very beginning, not as an afterthought. Some Blackfoot community members have been directly involved in guiding how their own DNA research should be handled, what questions should be asked, and how results should be shared with the public. This matters because it means the newest findings aren't just numbers pulled from a lab. They're part of an ongoing conversation between modern science and living, oral traditions passed down for generations. And here's something incredibly powerful. In many cases, oral traditions passed down by Blackfoot elders already hinted at deeper, older connections to other lands and other peoples, long before any DNA test existed. Old stories spoke of ancestors traveling great distances, stories of meeting other peoples along rivers and mountains, stories of shared ceremonies with neighboring nations whose languages sounded different, but whose respect for the land felt the same. For generations, some of these stories were dismissed by outside historians as myths or legends, not taken seriously as historical memory. But now, DNA evidence is quietly supporting pieces of what elders were saying all along. Think about that for a moment. Long before laboratories, before microscopes, before any modern science existed, oral memory was already carrying pieces of the truth forward, passed carefully from grandparent to grandchild, generation after generation. Science didn't discover the true depth of the Blackfoot story. In many ways, it's just now catching up to what had already been remembered. If this laboratories, before microscopes, before any modern science existed, oral memory was already carrying pieces of the truth forward, passed carefully from grandparent to grandchild, generation after generation. Science didn't discover the true depth of the Blackfoot story. In many ways, it's just now catching up to what had already been remembered. If this part of the story is hitting you differently, drop just one word in the comments that describes how you're feeling right now. I read those, and I want to know if this is landing the way I hope it is. Now let's talk about the human side of this discovery, because behind every genetic marker, there's a real family. A real child born long ago, a real mother protecting that child through a freezing winter, a real elder passing down a story by firelight, hoping it would survive another 100 years. Imagine being a Blackfoot warrior standing on the open plains hundreds of years ago. Being a Blackfoot warrior. The wind is sharp. The grass tried to draw simple lines around native nations far away. One tribe, buffalo, one territory, one across the horizon. It made things easier to write down DNA, easier to put on a map, genetic markers, easier to control ancient migration maps. Once colonization all he knew was his people. His real human history rarely fits into his responsibility to protect the ones he loved. People fall in love, but inside his blood, groups, quietly and visibly, was a story reaching back thousands of years. Even when the story connecting him to ancestors who crossed unimaginable distances, ancestors who survived ice ages, never dangers, the constant uncertainty of finding food in a world without any guarantees. Every single person alive today carries that same kind of hidden story inside them. Most of us just never get the chance to see it laid out so clearly. This is what makes the Blackfoot DNA story so powerful. It's not just about correcting an old historical mistake. It's about revealing how deeply and quietly connected human beings actually are, even when we've been taught to see each other as completely separate. For centuries, colonization tried to force native nations into small, simple, disconnected boxes. One tribe here, one tribe there, separate, controlled. Easier to manage on paper, but blood doesn't respect man-made borders. Ancestry doesn't care about lines drawn on a map by people who arrived on this land only a few hundred years ago. The real story of the Blackfoot Nation, and honestly the real story of almost every native nation on this continent, is one of deep, ancient connection, movement, meeting, mixing, adapting, surviving together even when official history tried to separate everyone into isolated little pieces. This new DNA understanding doesn't take away from Blackfoot identity. If anything, it makes it richer. It shows a nation shaped not by isolation, but by resilience through connection. A people who survived not because they were cut off from everyone else, but because they knew how to adapt, trade, share, and sometimes blend with others while still holding tightly to who they were. There's something deeply emotional about that idea. Identity isn't only about a single unbroken bloodline. It's about the choices a community makes, generation after generation, to protect their language, their land, their stories, and their people, no matter what challenges history throws at them. The Blackfoot Nation did that for hundreds of years, through brutal winters, through disease brought by early settlers, through broken treaties, through forced changes to their land and way of life. And they are still doing it today, protecting their culture, their language, and their sacred sites for future generations. That kind of survival is bigger than any single genetic marker. Before we get to the final part of the story, ask yourself something. If a DNA test revealed unexpected roots in your own family, would it change who you feel like you are, or would it simply add another chapter to a story you were already proud of? Now, let's bring everything together, because this final piece is where the whole story becomes something much bigger than just one nation on the northern plains. What the DNA reveals about the Blackfoot people is not really about tearing down an old story out of disrespect. It's about correcting a story that was too simple to begin with, a story shaped more by outside convenience than by actual truth. For generations, history books flattened native nations into neat little categories. One name, one territory, one clean migration line on a map. It made textbooks easier to print, it made borders easier to draw, but it also erased the true complexity, movement, and connection that shaped these nations long before anyone else arrived on this continent. The Blackfoot Nation was never a simple, single bloodline. moving quietly across the plains in isolation. Their story includes deep ancient roots, but also unexpected connections, long-forgotten migrations, and quiet threads linking them to other native peoples across huge distances. Some researchers believe more discoveries are still coming. As DNA technology keeps improving, and as more native-led studies continue with proper respect and permission, we may keep learning new layers of this story for years to come. That means this isn't really the end of the Blackfoot story. It might just be the beginning of finally understanding it correctly, using both modern science and the oral memory that native elders protected for generations, long before anyone believed they should be taken seriously. There's something almost humbling about all of this. A nation known worldwide for strength, courage, and pride on the open plains turns out to have a deeper, more complicated, and honestly more beautiful history than the simple textbook version ever gave them credit for. And maybe that's true for so many of us, not just the Blackfoot Nation. Maybe most human stories are far more connected, far more layered, and far more surprising than the short, simple version we were handed growing up. If there's one thing the story leaves behind, it's this. Identity is never just a single line. It's a pattern, woven from thousands of years of survival, movement, memory, and love, passed down quietly through blood and story alike. The Blackfoot Nation was never just one simple thread on the plains. They were and still are part of something much older, much wider, and much more connected than anyone ever fully realized. And somewhere out there, in someone's blood right now, another hidden story like this one is still waiting quietly to be discovered.